Hey everyone, welcome to Off the Clock. I'm Steve Bowes, going solo today. Trish is on vacation. I wish her well. Hopefully she made it safely over to London, which is where she was heading last night. Um, and hopefully without a checked bag. I think it's pretty sure right now, if there's something in your life you never want to see again, the best bet is to place it in a suitcase and check it on an international flight through Europe, and chances are you will never see it again. So, but hopefully she's doing well and has all her luggage with her. A couple of things I wanted to talk about today really quickly as we kind of wind down the week. And from my email today, by the way, I've sent a few emails this morning, and judging by the percentage of out of the office auto replies I've received, I'm not sure anybody is working at all this week. This must be peak vacation week, at least here in the US. So hopefully folks are getting a break. I've talked about this some on the show. I live in North Carolina and have not always lived here. Moved here a few years ago, and I love it here. I love it in the Southeast. I'll probably never leave the South, hopefully, but we'll see. But one of the things about the Southeast I don't understand at all is kind of the irrational love and obsession with Chick-fil-A. And I know that could be semi-sacrilegious to folks, especially Southeastern folks. Look, it's fine. It's a chicken sandwich. It's okay. Waffle fries, great. They're fries. They're shaped like in a waffle shape. It's fine. It's fine. But people down here are obsessed with it. The lines at a Chick-fil-A, whether it's one just in a strip mall or in a busy shopping area or at the airport here in Charlotte, where I go in and out of most of the time, the line at the Chick-fil-A there is ridiculous. It's probably longer than the TSA check-in line. I don't understand it. And here's another example of why it makes no sense either. Recently, this was in the news this week, a North Carolina Chick-fil-A, I believe it was in Hendersonville, North Carolina, which is in Western North Carolina, attempted to what I believe to be blatantly circumvent U.S. labor laws and hire volunteers to work in their drive-throughs, helping to shepherd cars and the line. Chick-fil-A drive-throughs are notoriously crowded and long, and they've gotten into trouble in some locations where the drive-through line at the Chick-fil-A spills into neighboring businesses, parking lots and driveways, and there's a lot of issues because so many people have to have these chicken sandwiches. So they attempted to bring in quote unquote volunteers, and they would pay them in chicken sandwiches, right? So the deal was if you worked a shift as a volunteer in the drive-through line, you could get up to 5 chicken sandwiches per shift. Of course, there was backlash, and they took a lot of heat from this. And the offer, as well as the post that they'd put on their Facebook page advertising this opportunity, if you will, was taken down because, like I said, I'm pretty sure it violates the laws in the United States, which basically say you can't be paid in chicken sandwiches. We generally require if you're working for a for-profit organization, you get paid in actual U.S. currency or U.S. funds. So, but I don't understand it at all. If you're a big Chick-fil-A fan or grew up with it, maybe I get it. I don't get it at all. It's fine. I probably have one per year, and that's probably enough for me. I have one other story I wanted to talk about, and I talked about this on our Workplace Minute show, which I think posted this morning, if I'm not wrong. And if you don't know, you should check out the Workplace Minute show. I do 2 of them per week usually, and they're basically the version of our podcast, the old HR Happy Hour on Alexa show. We migrated it over to the Workplace Minute. It runs on your Amazon Alexa device, as well as actually you can subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts as well. And I do 2 or 3, usually 2 per week, where I just talk about workplace issues, workplace news items that were of interest. And here's one I found, and I'll share it with you here too. A little more interesting than the Chick-fil-A story, perhaps. Mars Wrigley were the giant candy company, right? They make candy and chocolates, right? You know them all over the world, Mars Wrigley. Mars Wrigley in Australia is doing something really, really interesting on the recruitment side. They're giving job candidates the option to bring in some of their loved ones and family members inside or into the interview process and include them in interviews for prospective candidates who are looking perhaps to work for Mars Wrigley to ensure that the company is a good fit for that employee. So they encourage folks to bring in a family member, whether it's a spouse or a friend, brother, anybody who's really close to them, and talk about the softer issues, right? Cultural fit, work-life balance, flexibility that the person may or may not need in their schedule, et cetera, et cetera. to try to give them some comfort level, because they've got some data that they're working off of, which makes sense both anecdotally and in a data perspective, that something like 3/4 of candidates consult with a close family member about whether or not to take a new job, right? That makes sense. If you were going to take a new job in your own life, chances are, if you're married or you have just some close family members or maybe your children, you would consult them or at least hear them out before you made that decision. And so by inviting these family members or close contacts into the interview process, they're hoping that they'll provide more of a comfort level for both the candidate as well as the family members in making the decision of the candidate potentially to join Mars Wrigley. And importantly, the folks at Mars Wrigley also note that whatever happens in these loved one interviews won't kind of be a major factor, or really a factor at all, in deciding whether or not to hire the candidate, right? They're not going to reject a candidate because, I don't know, maybe they've got a wacky uncle who sat in on one of the interviews, right? I thought it was pretty cool. I've never heard of it before. And in lots of years of following work and workplace and recruiting and all these kind of workplace issues, I'm always interested when I hear something I've never heard of before. That's not to say no one's ever done it before. I just never heard it before. So kind of kudos to Mars Wrigley Australia for checking that out and kind of doing something innovative, right, in the recruiting process. So last thing for me, for folks who are fans of the New York Times, there might be some out there. I read this really interesting feature. Part of what we're doing on the podcast, on the new Outwork in America podcast, is highlighting people doing really interesting jobs, different jobs, trying to get to know them a little bit, trying to uncover some things that maybe maybe don't get talked about enough. Our last podcast we just posted, in fact, was with Amy Trout, who's the ranch manager at a place called Warm Springs Ranch, which is where all the Budweiser Clydesdale teams are. They're born there, they train there, they sort of grow up there, and they live there. And it was an amazing place, a beautiful place, kind of in the countryside in Missouri. Amy was a wonderful guest, and we got to up close and personal with lots of the Clydesdale teams, and was fascinating. And I hope I encourage folks to check that out. You can find that, of course, wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to hrhappyhour.net. One other story I read, I mentioned the New York Times because I read this in the New York Times recently, which was about a gentleman called, let me get his name right, Jim Bintliff. And if you may not know his name, but chances are you've seen his work, or at least seen people interacting with his work. And that is every single Major League Baseball game here in the United States, in Major League Baseball, and I guess in Canada as well with the Toronto team, the baseballs that are used in the game, and there's about 150 baseballs that are used in every single Major League Baseball game, they are treated prior to the game with a specific application of mud. That's right, mud, M-U-D. And that mud comes from one place and one provider, and that provider is Jim Bintliff, and that place is somewhere undisclosed on the Jersey Shore next to some creek or river. It's very, very secretive because Mr. Bintliff and his company, which I believe is just him, don't want to give away where that mud comes from, but he sells buckets of mud, and he does some treatment to the mud as well prior to selling it to Major League Baseball. But every single baseball used in a Major League Baseball game gets treated in a very specific way with mud that's taken from a creek in New Jersey somewhere, that's dug by him, Mr. Jim Bintliff, just himself. And the business has been in his family since his grandfather, and it was started back in 1938 by an old Major League Baseball player himself who was friends with the Bintliff's grandfather, and that business is now passed down the Bintliff family line. But if you get access to the New York Times, I know there's a paywall there, but I'm sure you can get like a free article or two every month. If you're interested in baseball at all, you're interested in kind of a quirky, interesting kind of American work story, or just something just different and a fun read, I'll encourage you to check that out in the New York Times. Just search for Major League Baseball's mud, New York Times, etc., and you'll find it. It's a really good read, and I highly recommend it. It was probably the most interesting thing I read all week. So all right, that's it for the show. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. Hope Trish is doing well. I'm not sure what's happening with the show next week. I know Trish will be out. I'll probably do at least one or two of these. We'll see. Maybe I'll bring on a guest or two. I do encourage you to also check out our show that we did with Amy Trout from Warm Springs Ranch, and all the other shows, all of these shows, all the Workplace Minutes, everything else, all at hrhappyhour.net. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great weekend, everybody.